18-year-old Shelia Eddy sat in that West Virginia courtroom, and she was smiling, while Skylar Neese's parents wept in the gallery, while the prosecutor detailed how their daughter was stabbed to death in the Pennsylvania woods. Shelia smiled like she was watching someone else's movie. This wasn't nervousness or shock, this was something much colder. Before we dive into this case, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing our accused family from around the world. That courtroom smirk didn't just happen overnight. It all started on a summer night when 3 teenagers went for a drive, but only 2 came home alive. But to understand how 2 best friends could plan and carry out such a brutal murder, we need to go back to the beginning and see how jealousy, secrets, and teenage drama turned deadly in the small town of Star City, West Virginia. This is Accused, where we dig deeper than the headlines you've already heard. If you're new here and love true crime that goes beyond the surface, hit that subscribe button because we post twice a week with cases you won't find anywhere else. This case shattered the quiet college town of Morgantown and exposed how teenage jealousy and secret relationships can turn deadly. Today we're covering the surveillance footage that broke the case, the social media evidence prosecutors used, the confession that shocked investigators, and that chilling moment when Shelia's true nature showed in court. This is the story of how a midnight ride turned into premeditated murder, and how one girl's courtroom behavior revealed the mind of someone who felt no guilt at all. Skylar Neese was just 16 years old in the summer of 2012, but she had big dreams. She was an honor roll student at University High School with a perfect 4.0 grade point average, and she wanted to become a criminal defense attorney after graduation. To help pay for college, she worked evenings at the local Wendy's restaurant, always showing up on time and never complaining about the long hours. Her parents, Dave and Mary Neese, called her their miracle child. She was their only daughter, born after years of trying to have kids. Dave worked as a product assembler at Walmart, while Mary worked as an administrative assistant at a cardiac laboratory. They weren't wealthy, but they gave Skylar everything she needed and supported all her dreams. Skylar was the kind of teenager who stood up for what she believed in. She was opinionated and never backed down from an argument, traits that sometimes got her into trouble but also showed her strong character. For years, Skylar had been part of an inseparable trio with Shelia, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf. The 3 girls had been best friends since middle school, constantly posting photos together on social media and calling themselves best friends forever. They did everything together, shopping at the mall, going to movies, having sleepovers where they would stay up all night talking and laughing. From the outside, they looked like typical teenage best friends who would be in each other's weddings someday. But in the small town of Star City, West Virginia, with only 1,800 people, secrets don't stay hidden long. By the spring of 2012, something had started to change in their friendship dynamic that Skylar's other friends began to notice. Rachel and Shelia had started spending more time alone together, leaving Skylar feeling like the third wheel in her own friend group. There were arguments that got heated, tension that seemed to build every day, and moments where Skylar would complain to her other friends that Rachel and Shelia were acting weird around her. What Skylar didn't know, what no one knew at the time, was that Rachel and Shelia had developed a secret romantic relationship. In the conservative small-town environment where they lived, both girls were terrified of anyone finding out they were together, and Skylar, with her strong opinions and inability to keep quiet about things that bothered her, had started to figure out their secret. That knowledge would ultimately cost her everything. The planning didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't a crime of passion. Looking back at social media posts, text messages, and digital evidence that investigators would later uncover, it becomes clear that Rachel and Shelia had been discussing getting rid of Skylar for weeks before they actually went through with it. They had researched isolated locations where they could take her, places where no one would hear screaming or find a body quickly. They had talked about different methods and settled on stabbing because it would be quieter than other options. They even practiced their story about what they would tell people when Skylar went missing, making sure their alibis matched perfectly. On July 5, 2012, Skylar had a completely normal day that gave no hint of the horror that was coming. She worked her usual evening shift at Wendy's, serving customers and joking around with her coworkers, like always. She came home around 10 p.m., tired but in a good mood, and spent some time with her parents watching television. Dave and Mary later said she seemed happy and relaxed that night, talking about her plans for senior year and her college applications. She went to her room around 11 p.m., and her parents assumed she was going to bed early because she had to work again the next day. but instead of sleeping, Skylar was texting with her friends like any normal teenager on a summer night. Around 11 p.m., she got a message from Shelia asking if she wanted to go for a drive. This wasn't unusual at all. The three girls often drove around late at night, sometimes going to get fast food or just driving around listening to music and talking. It was a typical teenage activity in a small town where there wasn't much else to do. Skylar texted back that she was interested, and they made plans for Rachel to pick her up in her car around 12:30 a.m. What Skylar didn't know was that Rachel and Shelia had already decided this would be her last car ride ever. They had spent the evening gathering supplies, kitchen knives hidden in hoodies, paper towels, cleaning cloths, bleach, a shovel, and clean clothes to change into after the murder. They had planned every detail except for one thing. They hadn't planned on how the guilt would affect them differently afterward. At exactly 12:30 a.m. on July 6, 2012, surveillance cameras from Skylar's apartment complex captured her climbing out of her bedroom window. The footage shows her pushing a chair up to make it easier to get out, something she had done many times before when she wanted to sneak out to hang with friends. Her parents had no idea she was sneaking out regularly. They thought she was a good kid who followed the rules. The security camera caught her walking across the parking lot in her pajamas and a hoodie, looking relaxed and happy to see her friends. She got into the back seat of Rachel's silver Toyota Camry while Rachel drove and Shelia sat in the passenger seat. The car drove away from the apartment complex, and it would be the last time Skylar Neese was ever seen alive on camera. They drove for about 45 minutes through the winding back roads of West Virginia and across the state line into Pennsylvania. Their destination was a remote wooded area near a tiny community called Brave, Pennsylvania, a place so isolated that even during the day, you might not see another person for hours. The drive gave them plenty of time to make small talk and keep Skylar calm, probably talking about typical teenage things like school, boys, or plans for the summer. Skylar had no reason to be suspicious. She trusted these girls completely and had no idea they were driving her to her death. It was just after 1 a.m. when they reached the isolated spot along a dirt road that Rachel and Shelia had scouted out. Earlier, the area was completely dark with no houses or streetlights for miles in any direction. There were thick woods on both sides of the road, and the only sounds would have been crickets and other night noises. According to Rachel's detailed confession that would come months later, they got out of the car and told Skylar they wanted to walk into the trees to smoke marijuana together. This was believable because all three girls had experimented with drugs before, and Skylar wouldn't have thought twice about getting high with her best friends in a private location. They walked deeper into the woods, with Rachel and Shelia making small talk to keep Skylar calm and unsuspecting. They talked about normal teenage things, maybe complained about their summer jobs, or gossiped about other kids from school. Skylar was probably feeling relaxed and happy to be spending time with her friends, having no idea that both of them had knives hidden in their hoodies and had rehearsed exactly what they were going to do to her. Then Shelia gave the signal they had agreed on earlier. According to Rachel's confession, they had planned to attack on the count of 3, and when Shelia said 3, both girls pulled out their knives and attacked Skylar from behind. The attack was sudden, coordinated, and brutal. Skylar had no time to defend herself and probably didn't even understand what was happening at first. When she realized her best friends were stabbing her, she tried to run deeper into the woods. But Rachel tackled her to the ground and continued stabbing. The attack lasted only a few minutes, but it was vicious and thorough. Both girls continued stabbing Skylar until she stopped moving and they were sure she was dead. The whole time, according to Rachel's later statements, Skylar kept asking them why they were doing this to her. She couldn't understand how her best friends could turn on her so completely. Her last words were reportedly begging them to stop and asking what she had done wrong. After Skylar was dead, Rachel and Shelia didn't just leave. They spent considerable time at the scene trying to clean up evidence and hide the body. They covered her with branches and debris, trying to make sure she wouldn't be found quickly. They used the bleach and paper towels they had brought to clean blood off themselves and off the knives. They changed into the clean clothes they had packed and put their bloody clothing in plastic bags to dispose of later. By 1:30 a.m., they were driving back toward West Virginia, already putting their cover story into action. During the drive home, they practiced what they would tell people when Skylar was reported missing. They agreed to say they had picked her up for a drive, hung out for about an hour, and then dropped her off at the end of her street around 11 p.m. so she could sneak back into her house. They deleted text messages from their phones and made sure their social media posts wouldn't contradict their story. By the time they got back to Star City, they were already posting on social media like nothing had happened, talking about what a fun night they'd had hanging out together. Quick question for the accused family: what case do you want me to cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments. Should I cover the Slender Man stabbing case where two 12-year-olds tried to kill their friend to impress a fictional character? The Conrad Roy texting case where a teenager convinced her boyfriend to commit suicide? Or another friendship murder that shocked a small town? Let me know what interests you most, because I read every single comment and use your suggestions for future episodes. The engagement from this community helps me decide what cases to research next. And I love hearing your thoughts on these stories. When Dave and Mary Neese woke up on July 6th and found Skylar's bed empty and her bedroom window wide open, they immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Skylar had snuck out before. What teenager hasn't? But she always came home by morning, and she had never left her window open like that. They searched the apartment and called her cell phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail every time. By 8 a.m., they were panicked enough to call the Star City Police Department to report their daughter missing. The first responding officer wasn't particularly concerned. Teenagers disappear all the time, and most of them come home within 24 hours, after getting into some kind of trouble or having an argument with their parents. But Dave and Mary insisted this was different. Skylar wasn't the type to just vanish without telling them where she was going. She was responsible, she had a job she cared about, and she had never stayed out all night without permission before. The officer took their report but made it clear that he expected Skylar to show up soon with some embarrassing story about where she'd been. The first break in the case came when Mary Neese remembered that their apartment complex had recently installed security cameras. She asked the landlord if they could check the footage from the previous night, hoping it might show which direction Skylar had gone when she left. What they found was both helpful and heartbreaking. Clear footage of Skylar climbing out her window at 12:30 a.m. and getting into a silver car that drove away. The camera angle wasn't good enough to see the license plate or identify who was in the car, but it proved that Skylar had left willingly with people she knew and trusted. The first people police interviewed were Skylar's two best friends, Rachel, Shoaf, and Shelia, Eddy. Both girls showed up at the Neese apartment that morning, claiming they wanted to help search for their missing friend. They seemed genuinely worried and confused about where Skylar could be, and they were eager to help in any way they could. When police asked them about the previous night, both girls told the same story. They had picked Skylar up around 11 p.m., driven around for about an hour, and then dropped her off at the end of her street so she could sneak back into her house. They claimed that was the last time they saw her, and they had no idea why she might have disappeared. But investigators quickly found holes in their story. The surveillance footage clearly showed Skylar getting into a car at 12:30 a.m., not 11 p.m., like the girls claimed. When confronted with this discrepancy, Rachel and Shelia said they must have been mistaken about the time, but their new timeline still didn't match the video evidence. More importantly, cell phone records showed that Rachel's phone had traveled much farther that night than just around the local area. The phone had pinged cell towers along a route that led all the way to Pennsylvania, which directly contradicted their claim that they had just driven around Star City for an hour. For months, both girls maintained their innocence while putting on perfect performances as concerned best friends. They organized search parties, posted flyers around town, and gave tearful interviews to local news stations begging for Skylar's safe return. They created social media campaigns with hashtags like Find Skylar Neese and Bring Skylar Home, old photos and memories of their friend. To the outside world, they looked like two teenagers who were devastated by their best friend's disappearance and desperate to help find her. But behind the scenes, their behavior was starting to seem strange. Two people who knew them well, other students at University High School, noticed that Rachel seemed to be having emotional problems. She was crying unexpectedly, having panic attacks, and missing school frequently. Shelia, on the other hand, seemed remarkably unaffected by her best friend's disappearance. She continued going to parties, posting normal social media content, and acting like life was completely normal. The contrast between their reactions started to make people suspicious. Police administered polygraph tests to both girls, and both failed spectacularly. When confronted with the results, they claimed the tests were unreliable and that they were just nervous because they felt guilty about not protecting Skylar somehow. Their stories kept changing in small ways every time they were interviewed. Sometimes they said they dropped Skylar off at 11 p.m. Sometimes at 11:30. Sometimes they said she seemed happy that night. Other times they claimed she seemed upset about something. These inconsistencies were red flags for experienced investigators who knew that innocent people's stories stay consistent because they're telling the truth. The investigation expanded to include the FBI and the West Virginia State Police as it became clear that this was more than just a missing teenager case. Investigators began analyzing the girl's social media accounts, text message histories, and digital footprints with the kind of detailed scrutiny usually reserved for terrorism cases. What they found was disturbing evidence that Rachel and Shelia had been researching isolated locations in Pennsylvania weeks before Skylar disappeared. They had searched for information about how long it takes bodies to decompose, how to clean blood out of fabric, and other suspicious topics that had nothing to do with normal teenage interests. The breakthrough came in the form of additional surveillance footage from a convenience store along the route to Pennsylvania. The video clearly showed Rachel's silver Toyota Camry driving past at 1:15 a.m. on July 6, with 3 people visible inside. On the return trip, filmed about 90 minutes later, only 2 people were visible in the car. When confronted with this evidence, Rachel and Shelia claimed they couldn't remember stopping at any convenience stores and suggested that maybe the footage was from a different night, but the timestamp and license plate clearly proved they were lying. Everything started to fall apart for Rachel Shoaf in the fall of 2012. The psychological pressure of living with what she had done was destroying her mental health in ways that became impossible to hide. She started having what her family described as severe panic attacks and emotional breakdowns. She would cry for hours without being able to explain why, and she began talking about feeling guilty about things without specifying what those things were. Her grades plummeted. She stopped participating in activities she had previously enjoyed, and she became increasingly isolated from everyone except Shelia. By January 2013, Rachel was having such severe psychological problems that her parents had her hospitalized and began intensive therapy sessions. Her therapist quickly realized that Rachel was carrying enormous guilt about something, but it took weeks of sessions before she was ready to talk about what was really bothering her. Shelia, meanwhile, continued to act completely normal. She was still posting on social media, going to school, working her part-time job, and acting like her best friend's disappearance was just an unfortunate mystery that she hoped would be solved soon. On January 3, 2013, after months of psychological torment, Rachel Shoaf finally told her lawyer the truth about what happened to Skylar Neese. Her confession was detailed, horrifying, and completely believable to investigators who had been suspicious of her story from the beginning. She admitted that she and Shelia had planned Skylar's murder for weeks, that they had lured her to a remote location under false pretenses, and that they had both participated in stabbing her to death. She led police to the exact location where they had hidden Skylar's body, providing details that only someone who had been there could know. When investigators asked Rachel why they had killed their best friend, her initial answer became infamous for its chilling simplicity: "We just didn't like her anymore." For years, this statement was accepted as the complete motive to teenage girls who had gotten tired of their friend and decided to eliminate her rather than just stop being friends with her. It seemed to represent the ultimate in teenage cruelty and the banality of evil, showing how someone could commit murder for reasons that seemed absurdly trivial. But the real motive was actually much more complex, and wouldn't be revealed until years later. At Rachel's parole hearing in 2023, she finally told the complete truth about why they had killed Skylar. She and Shelia had been in a secret romantic relationship that they were desperate to hide from their families and friends in their conservative, small town. Skylar had figured out their secret and had started making comments that suggested she might expose them. Rather than risk their secret relationship being revealed, they decided that Skylar had to die. It was a murder motivated by fear, shame, and the desperate desire to protect a secret that they thought was worth killing for. The arrests happened quickly once Rachel confessed. On May 1, 2013, Rachel Shoaf was arrested and immediately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years, which was considered lenient because of her cooperation and apparent remorse. During her sentencing hearing, Rachel broke down, crying, and expressed what seemed to be genuine remorse for what she had done. She apologized to Skylar's parents and said she thought about her victim every day. The next day, May 2, 2013, police arrested Shelia Eddy at her high school. Unlike Rachel, Shelia maintained her innocence for months. Even after Rachel had confessed and led police to Skylar's body, she continued posting on social media, acting like she was the victim of false accusations, and seemed genuinely angry that people suspected her of being involved in her best friend's murder. Her behavior was so different from Rachel's guilt-ridden breakdown that investigators began to suspect they were dealing with two very different types of personalities. It wasn't until January 24, 2014, almost 2 years after the murder and 8 months after her arrest, that Shelia finally accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the possibility of the death penalty. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. But even after pleading guilty, she showed no remorse and continued to act like the whole situation was just an inconvenience in her life. The moment that really revealed Shelia's true character came during her sentencing hearing. While Mother Mary gave a heartbreaking victim impact statement about how much life her daughter had left to live and how much the family missed her every day, Shelia sat at the defense table with what witnesses described as a slight smile on her face. It wasn't a nervous smile or a smile of relief that the legal proceedings were finally over. It was described by people in the courtroom as an almost amused expression, like she was watching entertainment rather than facing justice for taking someone's life. That smile told everyone in that courtroom exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Here was someone who could listen to a grieving mother talk about her murdered daughter and find something amusing about the situation. It was a moment that crystallized everything investigators and prosecutors had suspected about Shelia's character throughout the entire case. That she was fundamentally different from Rachel, not just in how she handled the aftermath of the murder, but in her basic capacity for empathy and human connection. Forensic psychologists who studied the case have pointed to Shelia's behavior as classic signs of antisocial personality disorder, sometimes called sociopathy. Her complete lack of empathy, her ability to manipulate others while feeling no guilt, and her total absence of remorse all fit the pattern of someone with a severe personality disorder. While Rachel showed clear signs of psychological breakdown after the murder, the kind of reaction you would expect from someone with a functioning conscience, Shelia seemed completely unbothered by what they had done. The contrast between the two killers has remained stark throughout their years in prison. Rachel has participated in therapy programs, educational classes, and has consistently expressed remorse for her actions. She has written letters to Skylar's parents, attempting to apologize, though they have understandably not responded. She appears to be genuinely haunted by what she did, and has shown signs of psychological growth and understanding of the enormity of her crime. Shelia, on the other hand, has received multiple disciplinary write-ups in prison for various infractions, and has shown no signs of remorse or personal growth. According to reports from people familiar with the case, she continues to maintain that she was somehow wrongly convicted despite her guilty plea, and she has shown no interest in taking responsibility for her actions. The difference between the two girls suggests that while Rachel was someone who was capable of terrible actions under extreme circumstances, Shelia may be someone who is fundamentally incapable of normal human empathy. The case had a lasting impact that extended far beyond just the families directly involved. Skylar's parents, Dave and Mary Neese, channeled their grief into advocacy work that led to significant changes in how missing person cases are handled. They worked with West Virginia legislators to pass Skylar's Law, which changed the criteria for issuing Amber Alerts for missing teenagers. Previously, there had to be evidence of an abduction before an alert could be issued, but the new law allows alerts to be issued more quickly when teenagers disappear under suspicious circumstances. The Neese family has also established scholarship programs in Skylar's name to help other students pursue their educational dreams the way their daughter had planned to do. Every year on Skylar's birthday, they organize memorial events that raise money for these scholarships, while keeping their daughter's memory alive in positive ways. The case changed how people in small towns think about teenage friendships and the secrets that kids keep from their parents. Many parents began paying closer attention to their teenagers' social media activity and friend relationships, realizing that even close friendships could hide dangerous dynamics. The phrase "we just didn't like her anymore" became a chilling reminder of how trivial motives can lead to devastating consequences when combined with the wrong personalities. As of 2024, both killers remain in prison, but their paths continue to diverge. Rachel Shoaf has been denied parole multiple times, partly because of the severity of her crime, but also because parole boards want to see more evidence of rehabilitation and genuine remorse. However, she continues to participate in prison programs and therapy. and some observers believe she may eventually be granted parole. If she can demonstrate sustained personal growth and accountability, Shelia Eddy will become eligible for parole in 2028, 15 years after her sentencing. However, given her complete lack of remorse and her disciplinary problems in prison, many legal experts believe she is unlikely to be granted parole on her first attempt. The parole board will need to see evidence that she no longer poses a danger to society, which seems unlikely given her continued refusal to take responsibility for her actions or show any empathy for her victim. The location where Skylar was murdered has become an unofficial memorial site, with people occasionally leaving flowers and notes in her memory. However, her family has asked that people respect their privacy and not turn the site into a tourist destination. Instead, they prefer that people remember Skylar through the official memorials that have been established in more appropriate locations. Today, there's a memorial bench for Skylar at University High School where she should have graduated as valedictorian. Her parents visit regularly, and current students often leave flowers and notes expressing how Skylar's story has affected them. The school also holds an annual memorial assembly where students learn about the importance of treating each other with kindness and recognizing the warning signs of dangerous relationships. The case continues to be studied by criminal psychologists and law enforcement professionals as an example of how teenage social dynamics can escalate to deadly violence. It's particularly notable because it involved female perpetrators in a demographic that rarely commits murder, and because the planning and execution showed a level of premeditation that is unusual in crimes committed by teenagers. For Skylar's parents, the passage of time hasn't made the loss any easier to bear. They describe feeling like they're living in a nightmare that never ends, where their only child was taken from them by the people she trusted most. Dave Neese has said in interviews that the hardest part isn't just that Skylar is gone, but that she was betrayed so completely by the friends who should have protected her. The case also highlighted the role that social media and digital evidence can play in modern criminal investigations. Without the surveillance footage, cell phone records, and digital forensics that tracked the girls' movements and revealed their lies, it's possible that the murder might never have been solved. The case has become a teaching tool for law enforcement agencies about the importance of thoroughly examining digital evidence in missing person cases. Tomorrow, we're covering another case where friendship turned deadly, but this time involving a group of teenagers who thought they were impressing a fictional internet character. The Slender Man stabbing case shows how online influences can push vulnerable minds toward violence, and how quickly childhood friendships can turn into something much darker. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss it. For everyone asking about merch and other ways to support the channel, check the links in the description. Your support helps me research these cases thoroughly and present them with the respect that victims like Skylar deserve. I also want to remind everyone that these are real stories about real people whose lives were destroyed by violence. While we discuss these cases to understand criminal behavior and seek justice, it's important to remember that behind every case is a family that will never be the same. Skylar Neese would be 28 years old today if Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy hadn't decided that their secret was more important than their friend's life. She should have graduated high school as valedictorian, gone to law school like she planned, and become the criminal defense attorney she dreamed of being. She should have gotten married, had children, and lived a full life surrounded by people who actually cared about her well-being. Instead, her life ended in those Pennsylvania woods because two girls she trusted completely decided she was inconvenient to their relationship. In the end, that courtroom smile from Shelia Eddy told us everything we needed to know about the kind of person who could stab their best friend to death and feel nothing at all. It was a moment of pure, undisguised callousness that revealed the emptiness where normal human empathy should have been. While Rachel's breakdown showed us what guilt and remorse look like, Shelia's smile showed us what their complete absence looks like, and that difference, more than anything else, explains how two teenagers could participate in the same horrific crime but emerge from it as completely different types of people, one destroyed by what she had done, the other seemingly untouched by it all.